Hello again, everyone. It's MrMostDaysOff, and I am back once again for the best darn diddly review show of The Simpsons. Woo! Today we've got episodes 5 and 6. That's Bart the General and Moaning Lisa. As you can tell from the titles, these are going to be pretty character specific for the most part. Two different great characters. But before I go any further, let me introduce you once again to your co-host with the most, Richie the WizKid. How are you today, Rich?
I'm in a good mood today, man. I got to watch some Simpsons. That's always a good thing to start your day off with. But as always, I will go ahead and throw it right back to you, the man, the myth, the macho man, Randy Savage in your heart.
Oh, yeah.
It is Miles.
So yeah, man, I have to say, I actually wasn't in a good mood when I woke up this morning, but I went for a swim. I watched some Simpsons, and I have to say, I'm feeling a lot fucking better. And I'm just gonna stop right here and talk about this in general. I'm really loving this experience so far. I mean, this is only our third episode. But holy fuck, is this fun to revisit the like really old Simpsons that I just frankly probably would have, like, if I go to my DVDs ever, I kind of migrate towards like 6 through 14, somewhere in that range, where like there's some really, really solid episodes. But I'm really enjoying going back and picking through some of the original ones, because there's some classics that come through here.
Well, honestly, man, for me, this is a bit tedious because I actually have to take notes. And you're like, oh, the first season? Yeah, no biggie. But there's so much that happens that you want to write down. And so when I say tedious, I mean that in like a positive way, if that's even possible. Because you just forget how much is involved with even the older episodes and how smartly written most of them are.
And the writing is so quick and witty too. It makes, I'm having to pause a lot while I'm watching these episodes, but I don't mind it because I'm going back to catch really good jokes that just kind of came through too fast. But yeah, I totally agree.
It's literally the first 2 months of 1990, and you've got this spot-on humor going on. It's ridiculous.
It really is like the 90s are here, and this is the like lead of the parade that's turning the decade. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into our first episode. It's episode number 5, Bart the General. It aired February 4th of 1990, so 1990 is still a fucking infant at this point, and it's already coming out strong. This episode had a really rushed opening credit sequence, which there was no couch gag and no chalkboard gag, which is really, really unusual. And other than the pilot, I think there's not too many that do this, but I did read on IMDb that this was due to time restraints because they had a lot in this episode that they felt that they couldn't cut.
Yeah, that's the only explanation when you see something like that, like a quickie intro.
It's the only thing that really makes a lot of sense, you're right. This episode did have a couple of noticeable first appearances. We meet the primary person that's introduced in this episode is Nelson Muntz. But we also did meet Jamie Powell, who is just, I believe she shows up in the treehouse whenever they're banding the troops together. I don't think she has a really significant role in this that I noticed, but Nelson Muntz definitely does, and he, as we know, comes on to be one of the more lovable Simpsons characters. Everybody loves to do the point and ha-ha. I mean, that's fucking classic. Exactly.
And also we get the first appearance of Grandpa and Herman in this episode. So for first timers, again, this is a pretty hefty episode with some really good characters.
Yeah, absolutely. We had talked about the fact that Grandpa really hasn't been a factor in this show yet, and he come out pretty strong in this. There's some good moments. Did you know that this episode was considered controversial when it first aired?
I did not know that, but I can see that because there's, the dream sequence where Bart's shooting a freaking machine gun at Nelson.
That part was actually cut, I do believe, from airing.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But this episode's about bullying, basically, so I could see, even though it was in the 1990s, that it might be a little controversial to show a kid getting beat up and having to fight back, sort of.
Well, what bothers me a lot watching this episode, I shouldn't say bothers, but it bothers me because of the PC world we live in, not because of The Simpsons. Homer in this, in a lot of ways, I mean, he teaches them to, like, fight dirty and shit, so that's arguable, but I just mean the fact that the way to deal with bullies back when this was the time period when we were both in elementary school, mind you, or just about to be, I should say, somewhere in there.
Yeah, we were like 5 when this episode came out.
yeah, so we would have been like in kindergarten, but we're getting into that phase of our life is all I'm saying. that's how, I was taught to deal with bullies back in the day, and it just really like I remember when I was in first grade, I got picked on by some third grader. I'd ride my bike to school, and they'd always like knock me and my friends off our bikes, and my dad like basically taught me like punch them in the stomach, then punch them in the face because they were really tall compared to me. So he knew that I wasn't just gonna like be able to like reach up and knock them down. So basically, he more or less told me to go for the family jewels.
Which, to be fair, Nelson is towering over Bart, so I had no problem with Homer teaching him that. Like, I've come in my older age, I've decided that if anyone ever tries to fight me, I'm a very short dude. So if I'm actually going to get in a fight, I want to win, so I will fight as dirty as necessary because that's got to be my only advantage over somebody that's bigger than me.
If you're in like an actual fight, like now, if we're talking boxing, if we're talking MMA, if we're talking any sort of professional competitive fighting, then yes, obviously there's such thing as fighting dirties. There are rules in place and you should abide by them. But fuck, if some dude at a bar is fucking with you or fucking with me, dude, hell no, there's no such thing as dirty fighting. Nope. This isn't a contest. I'm not getting paid it. It's not a contract. Like fuck
we're
you.
We're not Diaz and McGregor.
That was sick, dude.
Yeah, it was.
Holy shit, that was sick. But yeah, this isn't gonna play till a few weeks after that. But if you haven't seen UFC 202, my goodness, that main event was solid. Go back and check that out. Anyway, I went on a soapbox there, but it just annoys me that nowadays kids, if you were to deal with this problem in the way that Bart attempts to, well, before he gets an army, when he just tries to fight back with the mud and all that good stuff, you would be expelled or arrested. Shit like that goes on all the time. You can't even fucking deal with bullies anymore. It's frustrating as hell. Let's wrap this back around to The Simpsons. We were talking about why this episode is controversial. You already talked about the dream sequence, and we mentioned family jewels. So let's catch up to there. Essentially, this episode is about Lisa makes some cupcakes for her teacher, and Bart, while defending Lisa from Nelson's little goons, they basically crush her cupcakes, and Bart stands up for Lisa, and then she's like, no, he's friends with Nelson Muntz, and we quickly learn that Nelson Muntz is the school bully that torments everyone.
For the record, his goons, and the guidebook I have, The Simpsons, The Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, when they quote the other goons that Nelson has, they're literally labeled as Weasel number 1 and Weasel number 2, so they don't even have official names.
Yeah, it's a pretty telltale sign that they're probably not doing a whole lot in this series.
And also, when Lisa is getting Bart the cupcake to his face, when he finally gets a cupcake when he closes his eyes, if you notice, Lisa gets up and walks away on the bus at that point, and the bus is still moving. So I have no idea why she got up and walked away. Couldn't figure that one out.
Just changing seats, man. I don't know. I didn't actually notice that, but that's pretty funny. But yeah, so long story short, Bart is now getting tormented by Nelson on a daily basis. He has a 3:15 appointment to get his ass kicked and get rolled away in a trash can. His dad tries to help Bart out, and this is actually where we start to get some pretty funny parts. One of my favorite things is early on, Marge is... They're very stereotypical roles at this point. Marge is playing the stereotypical worried mother that, doesn't want her baby boy to be beat up and doesn't want him fighting. And Homer is playing the, I hope you won, son. That's the only thing that really matters. And then when he finds out that he didn't, he decides to help him learn how to fight. They are discussing the code of the playground. Let's see. Don't tattle. Always make fun of those that are different than you, and never say anything unless you're sure that everyone feels exactly like you do. That absolutely killed me, and that was absolutely the way it was in like elementary. Sure, a lot of people felt like that, but you never wanted to like be ostracized for saying something stupid because you just didn't want to have like that nickname attached to you for like your entire school years. But yeah, I also really appreciated when Marge was trying to interfere with Homer consoling Bart, and he said something along the lines of like, "Come on, Marge, I don't bug you when you're helping Lisa."
This episode, for those that need another idea of what it was like if you forgot this episode, this is the one episode that I feel like they completely messed up the voice acting and the sound on. This episode really bad has Godzilla mouth moving, where like they're saying something and the mouths on the cartoon characters are moving at a completely different pace. And I always try to pay attention to that, especially in earlier seasons. But this episode is just abysmal in that regard. Like it's a fun episode, but they didn't sync it up quite right on this one.
Huh.
Another fun thing, this is the turning point I felt like for Milhouse, because Milhouse has been a little asshole for the first few episodes, and this was the first time where he's starting to fit into his character as like Bart's lackey, kind of, where he's actually trying to be helpful to Bart when he's talking about Nelson.
IMDb actually has this listed as the official introduction to Milhouse. It's not his first appearance, which was in the earlier episode where he was being a dick, like you pointed out. Yeah, IMDb actually has this as his official introduction, so it's interesting that you note that. One other thing before we move on from this part, but Marge is essentially, after Homer has his part where he tries to teach him to fight. Oh, we'll stop there. That's Homer essentially tells Bart to kick Nelson in the family jewels. And believe it or not, the censors this is where the real beef with the censors came with, because the censors told them they couldn't use family jewels, and so instead they used it twice, because they used it in this scene and then they added a later scene where Grandpa is writing a letter.
Is that why he wrote that letter? I love that letter. Oh my God.
And he's actually complaining about how terrible television is, and he has a list of words that he no longer ever wants to hear again on TV, and they were all just really, like, bra was one of them, and family jewels was on the list. So yeah, that was the longest way ever to get back to our point of the family jewels thing, is where this controversy came from. And I really love the idea that they just rolled the dice and were like, fuck it, we know this is funny and not that big of a deal, so we're gonna play it.
I just think it's great because when you hear Grandpa's letter and the last thing he mentions is family jewels, I thought they were taking a shot at themselves because Homer said family jewels twice in that previous scene, I think. But now that I know that it was because of that, that makes me just love that letter even more. Fox gets ripped all the time by The Simpsons, and it's always fantastic.
It is really good. I love the way that they're somehow like the show that gets away with that the most. Futurama also does it once in a while, but I feel like The Simpsons obviously has been doing it the longest. So Bart goes to visit his grandpa on Lisa's suggestion, and he is old and wise, so he should have, a good strategy for dealing with bullies. And his strategy involves going to the military surplus supply store, where we meet Herman, the one-armed man. And there's actually kind of an interesting little reference here. When asked about how he lost the arm, he mentioned something about if your teacher tells you to leave your hands inside the bus window, you should listen. And if you recall, in the earlier episode we did where they're on the field trip, Mrs. Krabappel warns the children that if they stick their arms out the window, they might end up like the kid who lost his arm. And there's speculation that could be referencing Herman.
It all adds up, man. Those clever writers at it again.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so Herman is a crazy person. And he collects military junk, and he basically tells Bart that he should train an army. So that's exactly what Bart does. He gathers all of the children who have ever feared or hated Nelson, has them all gather in his treehouse, where he promises them victory and good times. They assault Nelson and his goons, or weasels, or whatever they were called, with water balloons before tying him up and forcing him to agree to terms of basically he will remain a threatening presence in the neighborhood, but he can no longer torment Bart specifically.
Which, let's be honest, that doesn't always work out well, because you got 27, 28 years of Nelson still, so
yeah, but I actually really like this, because afterwards Marge comes out and is like, boys, are you done playing war? And like both boys are like, yes ma'am, and then they actually cheers their cupcake that Marge brought them out for like a snack.
Yeah.
And I thought this was actually really reminiscent of how a lot of like child fights would happen. Like, I mean,
a lot of times you end up becoming friends afterwards.
Exactly. I remember there was people in like when I'd moved to like a new town or whatever that like initially like they would whatever, like we hated each other for whatever various reasons because we were dumb kids. And yeah, we would have like these insane like, like even to the point where like we would bloody each other up fighting, and then like half an hour later we're playing basketball. And, it's like, hey, do you want to come over for dinner type of shit? Like, that's how, like, kids fucking work. And it's just a natural, healthy way of letting kids work their stuff out. But I really like that ending to this show. I thought that was kind of... It brought it back full circle because, I mean, parts of this are relatively outlandish. I think it's pretty unrealistic to think that a 10-year-old boy could actually get an entire neighborhood to attack one person. Maybe I'm wrong, but it
that water balloons would stop them.
And that water balloons would stop them. Yeah, exactly. But it kind of brings it all back to full circle when Marge is like, "You're playing war," because that's what they are fucking doing. They're kids. They're playing this. This is a game, realistically. But it's just the way.
I enjoyed when Herman was showing the battle plans in the treehouse and showing the maps and everything, and he says the key to Springfield's always been Elm Street, and he says the Greeks knew it, the Carthaginians knew it, now you know it, and I'm just like, wait, no, none of those people ever came over
here. Absolutely no sense, but that's fucking awesome.
For those history buffs out there. They were in Springfield a long time ago.
But yes, this is actually one of the earlier episodes of this show that I really remember watching as a kid. Like that this one really always stood out to me in my mind, and I think in a lot of ways it really makes sense that it would speak to a child, just because it was dealing with it was from a 10-year-old boy's perspective most of the episode.
I also enjoyed all the last names that Bart was yelling when he was yelling at people to go through his army training. If you didn't hear, the last name he mentioned was Olajuwon. So he had a Hakeem's son in there, I guess, for all those basketball fans out there.
I like the little marching chants that they would do while they're going through. I can't remember any of them, but one of them was "We are happy, we are merry, we've got a rhyming dictionary." That fucking cracks me up.
I think this episode also had Lisa's first kiss in it.
Oh yeah, they recreated that famous World War II photograph where the sailor's kissing his chick upon return, or kissing a chick at some point. I don't know. Might have been right before they shipped out. For all these
people, I'm going to throw my nerdiness out there. In my past, in my younger days, when people used to challenge me to random Simpsons trivia, I would always say, the question I'd always ask that isn't a normal question is, when was Lisa's first kiss? And everyone always says Nelson. And me being the little smartass I am, always just goes, nope, wrong. It actually happened about 5 or 6 episodes into the show. It was some random little sailor dude.
That's fucking awesome. That's a good one to stun people with, for sure.
I was going to say, one quick little note of maybe some stuff that doesn't match up. During the war, when Homer opens the front door and yells at the kids to quiet down, Grandpa Simpson hits him with a couple water balloons. When he hits him with the second water balloon, if you look at the shot, it actually looks like Homer standing out on the back patio. And then when it cuts back to Homer, he walks through the same door he came out of. So like, there's no clear lines if he's in the front or backyard at that point, when like at the beginning he's clearly walking out into the front yard.
Oh, that's kind of fun. I also, while you're on that note of kind of like minor mistakes, I guess you could call them, as they did several exterior shots of the house that showed the backyard, and they did not have a treehouse in it. Yet there was the scene in the treehouse, and then in the next episode we'll get to a scene where Lisa actually walks out using the treehouse too. But yeah, all of that there wasn't actually a treehouse in the yard from the outside shots, which is
they're still trying to define the city lines and what goes where. I mean, South Park didn't define the city lines, so they made the Stick of Truth. So
yeah, and that was literally like 16 years into the show or something like that. So yeah, this has some room some wiggle room for sure. And I mean, realistically, it's still not only is it still defining its town, it's still defining its characters, and it really, I mean, it's really still just kind of, in a lot of ways, this is just like a comic book artist, like kind of toying around with the concept of television, and you can see that at
but it's just fun looking back after all these years. I mean, we have to nitpick the show a little bit. Like, we can't just say everything's great all the time.
Absolutely.
It's fun to catch the little incongruities or whatever it's called in the show.
Yeah, the inconsistencies and things of that nature are really, really fun. You're absolutely right. So there's one other scene after Nelson and Bart reconcile and sign their treaty and have their cupcake. We have one more scene which I remember absolutely just loving, and this is one of those scenes that defines why I love Bart as a character in general.
Clever name, since you said Bart in general.
Yeah, there you go. He's closing out the show and essentially breaking the fourth wall and talking right to us, the audience. And he talks about how, war is serious and never a good thing, blah, blah, blah. There's been no good wars with these exceptions: the American Revolution, World War II, and the Star Wars trilogy, which made me chuckle. But then I really liked, and if you want to learn more about war, there's lots of books at your local library. Many of them with cool, gory pictures. Well, good night, everyone. Peace, man. And that's how the show ends. And again, these little moments with Bart that was my favorite part of that was my favorite quote from the show. Again, I just really like that this whole episode is very Bart-centric, and Bart has always, especially, it brings back memories of when I was a kid, and I really did just think Bart Simpson was like the coolest thing ever.
Well, before we end our segment on this show, I want to go ahead and throw out there what, like we do at the end of every segment. I have my companion guide with me here, The Simpsons, a complete guide to our favorite family, and some stuff that we may have missed while watching this episode. I actually missed a lot of this. I usually only list one thing, but there's about three in here that I thought were cool. Lisa actually calls her teacher Mrs. Hoover in this episode, when the rest of the series she's always Miss Hoover.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't catch that. During their first fight, Nelson hits Bart 12 times in the face before he knocks Bart out. Think about that. Bart is a tough little fucker. He took 12 punches to the face before he was defeated. I mean, that's going to knock anybody down. I thought that was interesting when I actually thought
Nelson's
about it.
like twice his size.
Yeah. So, I mean, good for you, Bart. Way to take a punch. And then the last one was in Herman's model of the town of Springfield. He actually misspells Quickie Mart. He actually spells it with the correct spelling of quick in Quickie Mart. Now, for those of you that are true Simpsons fans, you know Quickie Mart is spelled Kwik on quick. So I thought that was actually interesting.
That is really interesting, and kind of a weird change, actually.
Yeah.
So moving on, we're our next episode we'll be going over is episode 6, which is Moaning Lisa. It aired on February 11th, 1990, so just one week following Bart the General. And this, as you might guess, is a very Lisa-centric episode. This one did have a full opening, so we did get our couch gag as well as our chalkboard gag. The chalkboard said, "I will not instigate revolution," which is kind of funny considering we just saw him do so in the previous episode.
So he got in trouble for that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's kind of some fun continuity there for you. And then in the couch gag, they go with a character pops out again. This time it was Maggie, and Marge did catch her. Again, it's early in the show, so they haven't really gotten very creative with these yet. So far, it's just been a bunch of popping outs and the one time the couch exploded. But so this one also has a couple of fun first. This is the first appearance of Ralph Wiggum, Jacqueline Bouvier, who is Marge's mother, Mr. Largo, the band director, and the not so famous jazz musician Bleeding Gums Murphy.
I think this might be one of my dad's favorite episodes, which is weird because typically with Lisa-centric episodes, that's not the case. But my dad just loves the jazz man.
I like the jazz man a lot too, but this episode just feels different than other Simpsons episodes, and it's reminiscent of the fact that reminiscent of other Lisa-centric episodes.
She's dealing with some heavy shit in this, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a being the most sad kid in second grade or whatever, or she's the saddest kid in grade number 2.
The saddest kid in grade number 2.
Nice, that was sultry, man. This one is just a different tone, and again, sourcing IMDb here, they admittedly say there was a reason for that. They were going for a sweeter, and they weren't going for funny as much as they were heartfelt and sweet of the connections that were made in this episode.
Oh man, the car scene with Lisa and Marge towards the end, I think is probably like my favorite scene up to this point in the show, which we'll get to in a little bit, but like it's kind of like I almost want to cry every time I see that scene.
Which is impressive because of the fact that that's showing a relationship with a mom and daughter. And traditionally,
two of the weaker characters.
Traditionally speaking, men aren't going to connect with that relationship nearly as much as a women would. Like, not that you can't be connected to everyone, but neither Richie nor I have ever been an 8-year-old little girl who's been sad. So the fact that I agree with him and it really touches me as well. It's a really, really well done scene. I think is really impressive once again to the writing and the character development that they're starting to put in place.
Yeah, well, it's not just the fact that neither one of us were an 8-year-old little girl, although that could be up for debate if you talk to some of our older friends. It's just the fact that Lisa and Marge...
I want to talk to these friends too.
I was talking about your friends, not mine. I feel like, you know...
It's a small dick, dude, not a clit.
But everyone knows that Lisa and Marge are the two weakest of the Simpsons. I mean, you can debate that all you want to, but they're show-wise and story-wise, they're the two weakest Simpsons. Maggie is even more important in my eyes than the two of them. So to have a strong moment between the two of them, I think, goes a long way to making people like them more.
Fair enough. I think so too. So yeah, this episode just opens on Lisa being sad. One somewhat funny thing is it actually opens up on her in the bathroom just being depressed, and her toothpaste is Glum brand, which I thought was kind of funny. But we see her just kind of going around the house in a very mopey sort of state. She gets all the way to the point where she's in band class, and it's very reminiscent to the opening credits, but in this case, she's kind of jamming out during America the Beautiful. and her band director is essentially, even though she's clearly the most talented musician in the room,
by a long shot.
Her band director just wants to play it without any soul, basically. Which I guess you can see the argument for America the Beautiful. However, I didn't get the impression that, I mean, it's not the national anthem. You can put some of your fucking own style to it as long as you're not disrespectful and whatnot. I mean, hell, this is America. You should be able to be disrespectful if you want to.
It was the fact that she was being creative and her teacher like shut down the creativity, which he actually makes a joke about that later in the episode. But I actually really thought it was a funny scene when Lisa's explaining while she's playing her saxophone the way she is, and she says, "I'm wailing out for the homeless family living out of his car, the Iowa farmer whose land has been taken away by unfeeling bureaucrats, the West Virginia coal miner coughing up his," and then she gets cut off by the teacher who says, "Well, that's all fine and good, but Lisa, none of those unpleasant people are going to be at the recital next week."
That was my favorite quote too. That was fucking hilarious. That was definitely the biggest laugh out loud moment in this episode, in my opinion. Which, again, this wasn't an exceptionally funny episode. It was a good episode, but it wasn't an exceptionally funny one.
No, this episode had a lot of good themes. And it had a little minor depression in there, not knowing where you fit in the world, and also had a father-son. What age does your child start beating you at video games? And when you finally get pleasure in beating your child at something, the kid wants to quit. Like all important themes in parenting and life lessons.
Yeah, that the video game subplot with Bart and Homer was actually pretty cool. Bart is essentially beating the shit out of Homer in this boxing game, and Homer goes and practices at an arcade so that he can beat Bart. And then, in probably for me personally, the absolute most just like moment of this entire show was Homer has Bart on the ropes. He has finally gotten to the point where he was gonna beat this little asshole's little ass. And Marge comes in the room and is like, "We need to talk about Lisa's feelings." And Homer is like, "Not now, this is more important, blah, blah, blah." And right before he delivers the knockout blow, Marge pulls the plug on the TV.
Which the game would still be playing, technically, if you think about it. The game would still be playing. If you plug that TV back in, it probably has a Homer victory screen.
It very well could, but I don't think that they are allowed to get that far. And then at this moment, Bart decides that he is going to retire undefeated from the world of video game boxing because he is such a little shit, but in a really funny fucking way.
Yep. It's a note that I noticed early on in the episode. They cut a couple different times back and forth inside the Simpsons house, and I thought I saw that the carpet was a different color in the same scene when they cut into multiple areas where they're still in the similar area. Like, it looked like the carpet was a different color a few times.
Huh, interesting.
But then you also, during Lisa's depressing time, get the point where her and Bart have Maggie choose which one that she loves more.
Yeah.
Maggie
this was another really funny scene.
Maggie, being the truest Simpson of them all, as usual, runs up and hugs the TV instead of Bart or Lisa. So that's just another great moment with absolutely no talking from Maggie.
Absolutely. So right after that, we get Marge and Homer both having a bad dream in bed. Homer's is about losing at video game boxing. This was before he went to the arcade to learn. Marge, however, being Marge, was worried about Lisa, and she was having kind of a flashback to when she was a kid. And her mom, no matter how Marge was feeling, her mom always told her that she just needed to put on the biggest smile she could, because smiles are how people judge how good of a job she's doing as a mother. Which is some pretty dark shit, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
Like, there's a lot of stuff with Marge that you're just like, oh my god. With a lot of the characters sometimes, but with Marge, you always see some very repressing stuff, like some stuff that I imagine is very repressed in her. But so they discussed it in bed. This was another one of my favorite quotes from Homer, because Marge tells Homer she's worried about Lisa and her emotions and blah blah blah, and Homer is like, "Oh, so that's it. This is some sort of underwear thing." And I thought that was funny. But this leads up to the scene Richie and I talked about earlier, where Marge is taking Lisa to school.
Well, wait. Can I say something about the scene right before this one, actually? Because I wanted to point something.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
What an asshole. The scene before this is actually where Homer's in the arcade trying to master the craft of this game so he can go home and beat the snot out of his child at this game. And something I really liked is when Homer's leaving the arcade, the kid that's been teaching him, the kid's mom says, "You should be ashamed of yourself," to Homer. And I looked at that and I was like, that is so weird. Like in today's society, that's so weird because it's already been established earlier by Bart that Homer is a little over 3 generations old. So that means he's in his 30s. We're technically in our 30s now, and this mother was telling Homer he should be ashamed of himself for playing video games with children. And if you think about that in context with today's society, like I still play video games all the time, and that's a lot of online gaming too. So like technically, we are playing video games with children all the time, and don't feel
There's
ashamed at
nothing
all.
worse than like a fucking 8-year-old who's like cursing me out and calling me a faggot as they're fucking beating me at Call of Duty or something like that. It's the fucking worst.
But just
yeah.
think about how times have changed. Because I was like, I got mad at that mom for saying that to Homer. I was like, no, fuck you. There's nothing wrong with that.
But you said it right there, man. Times really have changed because this was way back on the cusp. I mean, if you think about it, this was pre Super Nintendo. So I mean, we have the NES at this point. The Atari crash had already occurred and all that good stuff. But at this point, video games are very much considered a child's game.
This is still when arcades existed.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, those are making a comeback, man. We
Yeah.
got to go check out these places in Dallas that got it's like you pay a cover charge and it's a bar arcade and you just get to fucking play old school arcade games all day. There's a bunch of
That
them
sounds
you can
amazing
do,
to
but-
me.
Yeah, they're really dope. I've heard nothing but good things. They're all over the place now. So they're kind of making a comeback, but back then they were just arcades. You'd put a quarter in, you'd play till you died, and that was pretty much it. If you were like this kid that Homer trained with at like a game like Mortal Kombat or whatever, then you could make that quarter last a really long time. But I mean, for me personally, I don't think I ever made my quarter last more than like 3 to 5 games on like tops, and I'm talking like that I got lucky and I got like 3 shitty people that came up before someone good.
The old Street Fighter days.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but then we get to our moment with Marge and Lisa. Marge sends Lisa out the door with her fake smile, and she just kind of hangs back and watches, and instantly she kind of sees the shit that Lisa's going through. The kids call her a brainiac, and then they're like, "Hey, come over and do my homework later."
And this is while she's smiling, where they're actually like paying attention to her and saying, "Hey, you look nice," because she's smiling, and then immediately fall back into "come do my homework."
Yeah, like they're just like Marge said, people are treating her quote unquote better because of the fact that she's smiling, but realistically it's showing that they're really not treating her better. They're just not ignoring her, but they're still being kind of shitheads to her. But then the thing that just sets Marge off is the band director essentially tells her that she's being too creative and he wants to stifle her creativity. So Marge flips around, grabs Lisa, and they have this encounter where Marge tells her that if she wants to feel sad, she can feel sad. She needs to be who she is and be herself, and when she's sad, her family will be there for her, and when she's happy, her family will still be there for her, and Marge will put on the fake smiling for the both of them type of thing, to which Lisa replies with a smile. When Marge asks her, tells her she doesn't have to do that anymore, Lisa says, "But now I'm smiling because I want to." It's really fucking sweet. It gets a little bit dusty in the room sometimes when you watch that scene.
It just everything Marge says to Lisa right there is where you're like, that's a parent right there. Like that's exactly the way it needs to be right there. And like I said earlier, this scene almost gets me every time, man. Like I think it's the best scene in the series up to this point so far. And again, it's weird saying that when it's a Marge Lisa scene, but it's beautiful, man. It's a great moment.
I agree. I think from the dynamic of the family too, this episode does a lot with all the characters kind of showing. I mean, Bart is a mischievous little shit, and he shows that in this episode. Homer is kind of a buffoon, but he's still a loving father at the end of the day. He shows that in this episode. Marge and Lisa really connect, and they show an entire range of who they really are at their core. And so yeah, this episode is phenomenal, and it will be beat probably before the season's out with more heartfelt moments, but maybe I'm wrong. It might not come for a while. This is a scene that, regardless of where it ranks on your list, it's definitely a touching moment.
Just mark it down. Episode 6 is where you're seeing all of the family members, including Maggie, have clearly defined roles finally.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing through this entire episode that seems to give Lisa even a glimmer of happiness is her saxophone.
Saxophone. Saxophone.
So at one point there's a scene where Homer comes up and decides to tell Lisa she needs to quit playing. And this is kind of sweet, but in like a really fucked up sort of way. because it just shows how like loving Lisa really is towards her dad, even though he's kind of clueless at times. And Lisa essentially is like, I'll just practice keying unless that's too loud for you too. In which he has to think about it for a really long time before he's like, no, no, you tap away. I thought that was pretty funny. But after this, Lisa hears some really good saxophone music coming from her window. So as an 8-year-old girl, she sneaks out and goes through like the alleyways of town and meets up with a dude playing saxophone on, I believe, the same bridge that Homer tried to kill himself on.
Kind of freaky and fucked up a little bit.
Yeah, it is kind of dark, but the dude's playing the blues, and he shares what the blues is with Lisa, and they start playing the blues together. And his problems seem to be a lot more real than her problems do. Her problems are dealing with a bratty brother and her mom giving away her cupcake and things of that nature.
I've got a bratty brother. He bugs me every day. And yesterday morning, my mother gave my last cupcake away. My dad acts like he belongs. He belongs in the zoo. I'm the saddest kid in grade number 2.
That was beautiful, man. So that leads to another line I dug by Bleeding Gums Murphy, where he told Lisa that, hey, you can play pretty good for someone with no real problems.
By the way, they jam the hell out with that when they're both playing too. Like that's some great saxophone.
Yeah, it's actually really fucking awesome. I used to play saxophone, and I mean, I was like the best saxophonist in the 8th grade, and you know that was the peak of my
Really?
saxophone
I never
career,
knew that.
But, oh hell yeah, dude! I was band president in 8th grade.
I wanted to play the
and you
I wanted to
can't
play the
teach
saxophone
that.
because of The Simpsons, but I was told in elementary school my hands were too small for it, which I thought was kind of a dick move.
Oh, weird.
Yeah,
That's kind of fucked up.
I felt a little bit like
douchey,
Lisa.
But, so I got to 9th grade. And found out like essentially I could do both band and sports, but I would have to get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning every day and and then I wouldn't get home till like late, and you know I had a life of like playing video games and not having friends and shit at that time, so that was more important. But yeah, so I did play the saxophone, but that's neither here nor there. They play it much better, both of them, than I. And one other thing that Bleeding Gums Murphy said that I thought was pretty funny was Lisa says after they play that it didn't make her feel any better, and Bleeding Gums says the blues isn't about feeling better, it's about making other people feel worse. And making a few bucks while you're at it.
And pretty spot on. There was another moment that I enjoyed in this episode where Homer was watching TV, and if you listen to the TV is a news report talking about a fire that had broken out, and it's talking about how it burned down like the Symphony Hall and the Natural Museum and like all these historic landmark locations, and Homer isn't fazed at all, but as soon as it mentions Barney's Bolorama, Homer flips out. I made a note that it's like, honestly, like a lot of people would watch that and be like, oh, that's so Homer, and that's just how he is. But I really feel like that's legitimately how a lot of people would react. Like, I think it's just another great Simpsons reflecting on the way society actually is moments where people don't give a shit about the important things. They just care that their favorite bar burned down.
What sold that scene for me was right after that happened, Marge comes out of the kitchen and she's like, oh, I'm upset about something. And Homer's like, oh, you heard too? And then he says, the lanes were kind of warped, but the food...
Which we all know it goes back up and running because Homer works in there eventually.
So yeah, they obviously recovered. We also get another Moe prank call in this episode, which was kind of... I always enjoy these. Again, it shows off really who Bart is. Bart's actually trying to cheer up Lisa by doing a prank call to Moe, where he asked if he can speak with...
Jacques. Is Jacques Strapp there? Every phone call is always blissful to me.
Yeah, I really enjoy those, absolutely. So... You said it earlier on, Lisa episodes throughout the series, unfortunately, a lot of times end up being some of the least funny episodes in the series. This one fits in that category, but this one still really shines to me, and I do think a lot of it has to do, as we already mentioned, with the way they define these characters. They really start to tell us who this family is. I mean, Marge really shows off the fact that she is often the one that just kind of pushes her feelings deep down inside so that she can be the smiling, happy mother and wife that the rest of her family needs her to be.
this might be the most important episode of the season, and I say might be because I feel like, again, the Sideshow Bob one is a little more important. But even though it's a Lisa-centric episode, and honestly, it didn't play back as good as I remember it. I've watched this episode so many times and always really enjoyed it, so I was a little excited going into it. And then when I actually watched it, I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot. It's a Lisa-centric episode. And that kind of, like, I feel bad for putting it that way, but that kind of killed the mojo a little bit for me. But again, it could be the most important episode of the season.
Interesting. I thought this one played back a little bit better than I had remembered. I just remembered as a kid. I don't think this one really spoke to me as much as, like, say, the last episode. I don't think I really started to appreciate this episode until I was an adult.
Well, that's a good little nugget there for you then.
It's arguable if I've actually reached adulthood yet, so maybe I don't even appreciate this episode on the level that I one day will.
So you're saying that you and I are basically Bart and Ralph in the future when Lisa's president and we're living in a little bungalow and saying "smell you later" as an actual goodbye. Like that's us right now, pretty much.
That actually sounds pretty dope. Don't they start a band? Let's do that.
It's a shitty band, but you know.
Well, I don't have any musical talent because I quit the saxophone in 8th grade, so there you go. Does your Ultimate Fan Guide have anything else to add to this great episode?
It has a lot of notes that I don't think are worth mentioning, except apparently there were trophies in a Simpsons family living room trophy case. And you would think that a family like the Simpsons probably wouldn't get any trophies in anything they do.
Especially since this was before the times when participation trophies were fashionable.
Yeah.
That wasn't like such a big deal back then.
Yeah, but I thought that was a clever little note there. Good catch there, Simpsons Guide.
Right on, man. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Next week, we're going to have a couple of really awesome episodes to get to. Episode 7 and 8, we've got The Call of the Simpsons, which there's a lot of iconic scenes from that episode that I remember. I think a big part of that for me personally is because this was made into a level of the arcade game.
Yes, I was going to say that, yes.
Yeah, so that always helps. But the other episode is The Telltale Head, which I think might arguably, I may have already said this like 3 other times, but I'm going to say it again. I think this upcoming episode is going to be probably what would be considered the most iconic episode of Season 1.
It very well could be. I very much remember that episode a lot as a child.
So I look forward to those episodes for next week. Before we get on out of here, Richie, is there anything that you would like to plug?
Oh, no, not really. Just if you want to follow me, I'm on Twitter at thewiz_kid23. And as always, mothers, be good to your daughters, and fathers, be good to your daughters too.
Aw, that's so sweet. As usual, you can follow me on Twitter at MrMostDaysOff. I'm also on YouTube, where you should come and check out my weekly review or recap of the WWE Cruiserweight Classic that I do each and every Wednesday. Also, if you enjoyed this show, come and check out the WizKid and I review new release movies each and every Friday. And lastly, once again, I would like to have a big shout out and thank you to Steve the Fan for putting this show together, allowing us to come on his network and talk about one of the best shows of all time. Follow him at The Fans Podcast and check out his wrestling reviews as well. And we look forward to being back with you next week for The Call of the Simpsons and The Telltale Head on the Best Darn Diddly Review Show.
I just peed a little.